There we go. We had this meeting. It was June. Can you all see the screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, so it was June 30th, July 1st, and like Dan said, we had a number of ASCE colleagues who took the time to come down to Asheville, North Carolina for the meeting, which was really appreciated. It was great to have them there. It was a pretty focused meeting. It was really organized around the two major projects that my program funded with Inflation Reduction Act resources. One project is focused on trying to wire together our projection activities internally at NOAA. Because those activities are highly distributed, we have a lot of expertise, data, and centers of excellence around the agency, but they don't always work together, and we don't have a coherent projection services storefront or contact point or organization at the agency, and that's part of what I think motivates some of the requests for modernization from partners like ASCE. So we funded these two projects, the one of which was intended to wire things together, the other of which was intended to advance the science for this kind of more operational effort around projections from IRA funds. And this was really a PI meeting at some level to try to get these groups and institutions together and have really a first meeting where we focus on what it would mean to knit together the different steps that are needed to provide projection services. We wanted to understand what these groups have done so far, and then where they're going with the remainder of their funding, and where we're going as an organization beyond that, and having that be informed by our ASCE partners as well. So this is a conceptual diagram of the chain of different linked aspects of providing services for climate projections in particular, although this maps onto a lot of different data services. And that's really the fundamental aspect of what we talked about during the meeting. This is the group of folks who were there, a lot of Asheville colleagues from the National Centers for Environmental Information and the Cooperative Institute, as well as the CSS consulting group that Adriana works for, who presented earlier in this call. And she was also critically helpful for pulling this meeting together and very creative in a lot of the sessions that we had to try to tackle timelines and talk about more workshop-y activities. So it was a really nice group that we pulled together. We sent a survey out in advance of the meeting, and there was a really kind of clear sense in the group, which was illuminating for me because I have my own opinion about where I think NOAA is, but I think being able to survey a broader cross slice of folks and see how intense and in agreement folks are around both the opportunities in this area as well as our failures to date in this area was, I think, very motivational. So this may be hard to read. I can share these slides afterwards if you'd like, but some of the statements that folks agreed with, which are on the top and have very high scores out of a total of 5, are there being a clear and urgent need for a more coherent projection service capability, that NOAA has a unique role, mission, and justification to do this, that this is a good use of government resources. These are things that pretty much everybody agreed on very intensely. And then towards the bottom, that our current national framework is very poor, that users have no idea where to go, and that we don't have sufficient institutional internal support to really pull things together. And that's financial as well as strategic. So we tackled a lot of these issues during this workshop, thinking about how these funded projects can help to advance some of these issues, but also how we want to align our strategy to ultimately do something more coherent at the enterprise level in the future. So in terms of the accomplishments so far, we've made a lot of strides with work in the model data availability realm. This is for the SPHERE model that was mentioned earlier in this call. It's a leadership class climate model or implementation of NOAA's climate model at GFDL. There's been a lot of activity there that's, around kind of traditional data access, but also building AI tools and really collaborating with a broader community outside of the laboratory. Been some work on analyzing downscale data sets. Ultimately, we want this service to be able to help users understand and feel confident in the climate model information that they're using and that it is suitable for the particular application. Working on reducing uncertainty, and then this task force also has been a huge accomplishment of this activity so far. There was a presentation from Bilal, which outlined a really overwhelming amount of content and discussions and learning and relationship building that's happened because of this task force. I took this services diagram and applied the grading system that my elementary school children's teachers use to grade them. Where emerging basically means your child is not doing this and we're concerned, but we're going to use a really nice word to talk about it. Developing is one better, and then master means we really have that skill down. And I think all of these things, we have pretty strong elements of them at NOAA. Where I subjectively assigned an E is really where, in my opinion, we haven't leveraged it fully for what we need to do with projection services. So I would say there's nothing really here that we need to build out of whole cloth. We know how to do it perhaps in a different circumstance, like weather services or operational, climate observation or monitoring services, but we just haven't really applied it yet for projection information, which is a specific art and science. And then there are some places where, we really already have mastery at that piece or that linkage. So I think, this really kind of summarizes some of the discussions over the course of a couple days and where we need to really focus development and where we, really have investments along this whole value chain already that, are starting to come to fruition. So in terms of the near-term plans, there's a lot of activity left with the funded projects. That was something that was encouraging to take stock of. I think we've got something like about a third of the funding has been spent so far. So about 2/3 of the funding remains, which indicates that, we're really still kind of in the beginning stages of these projects. So there's a lot of stuff to come, the temperature IDF curves, future drought risk projections. Dan mentioned earlier Atlas 15 Volume 2, that's forthcoming. That's not funded by these projects, but that's kind of part of this overall projections activity. There's a journal article that is coming out of our projections task force that is trying to articulate what constitutes a trustworthy projection from a physical scientist and climate modeler's perspective. And that's intended to inform choices that have to be ultimately made in what data is emphasized or provided to users for application. We're going to develop a protocol out of this workshop that will help us systematically evaluate different data sources, of which there are an overwhelming amount. Strengthen formal agreements, and there I'm really referring to the ASCE NOAA Memorandum of Understanding and Relationship. As was mentioned earlier, that's something that Neil Jacobs supports. And so Allison and Amanda are working on that. And then low-hanging fruit. So like the discussion earlier on this call about the reinsurance industry, I think there are, this is a service. So we really want this to be of use and service to multiple different customers, and identifying upfront these kind of low-hanging fruit that are going to be used commonly across different industries or customers for the agency is going to be important. In the longer term, so beyond this initial investment, finding a way to execute the protocol that we're going to develop, that's going to require sustained staffing to do that, and also a strong institutional host for it. And so we're working on that. And then transitioning to a service. So this is really a research activity at the moment, and ultimately we want to turn it into more of an operational activity that handles multiple different types of models, data sets, different methods to do analysis to produce results, and being able to authoritatively provide a sense that we trust these data and we trust these analyses and we've compared them and we think they're best in class, but also to communicate when there's limitations, when perhaps data should not be trusted in certain circumstances. So a lot of practical outcomes from this meeting that we're beginning to get to work on, and yeah, and we had a lot of fun as well. So we all voted on our favorite euphemisms for climate projections, and some of the popular ones were like a sort of Prince-inspired Delta umbrella, the information formerly known as climate projections. And then if you're really into wordy options, scenario, condition, decision, relevant, temporally extended, environmental risk intelligence, and blah, 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 blah. So it was a great meeting, a lot of really good discussions, a lot of very good cross group discussions, which had not really happened yet. And I think we have a lot of runway in the near term and funding available to make progress on the existing work. And then beyond that, we clearly have an activity here that is filling a very significant gap in NOAA service provision and federal opportunity in this space. So I'll stop there and see if Allison or others who were critical to planning the workshop, Allison as well was really critical to planning this workshop, in addition to Adriana and others who attended, want to add anything to that. But again, really appreciate the folks who took the time to be there, and it was a very stimulating couple of days in Asheville.
Thanks. I'll chime in a little bit, although I feel like I'm going to just repeat some of the things you said, Dan, because that was a really, really good overview and very clear next steps. Yeah, I really appreciated just bringing all these people into one physical room, which was really nice. A lot of people from different line offices all coming together, and then all the different, PIs and project groups coming together. Some had not met or not, talked about their work together before. So I felt like even if we just accomplished that, we made some progress there, but we did a lot more than that. I think you mentioned this as well, Dan, but Deke also kicked us off by, talking about how now is the time to be thinking about these kind of bigger questions about what does climate services look like at NOAA, the kind of questions that it might take us a couple of years to answer. And we do have that runway, as you said. We do have some time. We do have some funds remaining in these projects to be thinking about those big questions. One of the questions on our agenda that kept kind of resonating in my brain, not that I came up with a great answer, but just how do we get all of these separate or siloed tasks and projects? How do we bring them together and make them feel like they're part of one cohesive service, like NOAA service? Dan, you also showed that services kind of chart that had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the last one, 8, was the user decisions. And so maybe I'll just channel Bilal. One of Bilal's comments during the meeting was when we were talking about the protocol, one of the last things on the list was also user decisions. And in some ways you could flip that upside down and start with the user decisions, which is of course what we're trying to do with the industry proving ground work here. And then my last comment is just, you mentioned the protocol, developing an evaluation protocol. And I just felt like there was a lot of excitement in the room. There may have been a Post-it note about rocking chairs and sleep, but there actually was like some enthusiasm and kind of even hands going up in the room of I will participate in thinking about this. So it was an invigorating way to kind of end the second day of a long meeting. So I'll stop there.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Any questions for Dan or Allison?
I have one comment. I thought the big, in addition to what was covered by both Dan and Allison, I thought that the entire team for coming up with the way forward for climate projections gelled together. I mean, it was this, I felt at the very end of the 2 days, we really had a team that's functioning as one unit. And the best part was watching the soccer game at the airport with the flight delays. But anyhow, thank you. It was very good.
Yeah, that was one thing about this meeting. I don't know if this is just what summer flying is like, but I feel like everybody's flights in and out had problems. So I know Allison got to celebrate her birthday in the airport with a bunch of other folks from the meeting unexpectedly at around midnight.
So,
Well, at least you were with friends. Any other questions? I have a comment, but I don't. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I agree, Debbie. This is what I came away from was I think there's a real opportunity here. I mean, I was at NOAA 10 plus years ago. God, almost 20 years ago. Anyway, in 2010, we kind of made a run at doing climate services. And I think the approach that this group's taking, which is, I think, much more, I think Dan characterized it as kind of bottom up rather than top down, is a great way to think about it. I think having an organization like ASCE that has a clear need and is technical and can engage at this level and provide some really compelling use cases, I think is going to, I think was very happy to see that acknowledged. But I think really there's a lot of this is a wicked problem. I used to say thorny problem, but now that I live in Maine, I'm going to say it's a wicked problem. Because, there's a lot of just fundamental questions about, how to deal with ensembles and how do you develop ensembles and how do we characterize uncertainty? When can we reduce uncertainty? How sensitive are some of the engineering decisions to that uncertainty? There's a lot of common ground here for us to work together on. And I think that we're going to have a few minutes here where we're going to talk about some recent meetings and then some upcoming meetings where I think we've got to kind of think through that process. Like, how can ASCE inform this process in a manner that's going to be useful for even a wider range of participants? So, but I see Ellen's got her hand up. So go ahead, Ellen.
Hey, Dan, thanks. So great to hear about this meeting, Dan and Allison. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see the faces and get everybody together to resolve something that people have wanted for a very long time. I'm thinking that there are some resources that are available to you on a couple of these areas. One is that Keith Dixon and Catherine Hayhoe wrote a paper on years ago as part of the CASC, the Climate Adaptation Science Center at USDA, on trustworthy projections. And so I wonder if that's a place where you could already go. And then I definitely have a question about whether the IRA money that supported this is obligated so that it doesn't run out in September.
Yeah, so that paper, so one of the issues is that we're trying to tackle is that a lot of the adaptation community has kind of gone on the run with LOCA and a couple of other downscaled data sets. And Keith's work is really helpful in doing intercomparisons in the statistical downscaling space. But outside of that, we have a lot of dynamically downscaled models. We have a lot of global models that are now at high resolution or have large ensembles that are useful, provide useful statistical information. We have emerging AI techniques. And one of the things that we're really challenged by is how you put those on an even playing field to intercompare the value added information that comes out of them. Like in some cases, it might be more valuable to have 60 ensemble members of a 50-kilometer global model to describe the probability function for precip than to have a potentially biased single ensemble member from LOCA. And that's not something that we, have a clear method for how to tackle, and we have to figure out kind of as part of this protocol. So I think like a lot of that work is useful, but it also needs to be broadened out to handle data that has been sourced from multiple different modeling techniques. In terms of the funding, yeah, it was all obligated a couple of years ago. So, these are grants that are, have multiple years of play and then no cost extension opportunities as well. So they're going to keep performing for, multiple years now and have access to those resources. Assuming that there's no change in policy regarding the IRA investments, here, the IRA investment any IRA money that had not been obligated to a grant last year was swept up and removed. These had all been obligated before that. I think BIL funded projects did actually get terminated. So they treated that funding differently, but I haven't heard anything new about IRA. My expectation is that those funds are just going to continue to remain obligated to their, their various awards.
Great. I just had one more follow-up, and that is that when you talked about authoritative, trustworthy information from NOAA, for example, and using those words that we've used for a lot of years, in November of 2024, I think it was, we briefed the NOAA Leadership Board, so the AAs, on the kind of corporate risk associated with what folks using NOAA's data could do with it. And in other words, it's sort of the buyer beware, the difference between laissez-faire and going all the way with some sort of regulatory framework about the use, the sort of practical use of NOAA's information. And I wonder if that would also be helpful as you define what it is to be trusted and authoritative, and why NOAA can go a long way towards these projection services. So there are some very key components in both the weather timescale and the climate timescale on why that is what many consider an inherently governmental function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We can
definitely one of the motivating factors, and I think pulling on our experience, like you're saying, from weather services, and then also NCEI's leadership in providing data that comports with IQA and documentation and clear procedures is key. I also want to say, Ellen, that the service delivery framework came up a number of times in the workshop, and so that legacy of yours is very much alive and informing a lot of the conversations. So thank you for all the work you did on that while you're at.
Well, one last thing would be that I would make your diagram a circle so that users aren't at the end. Just make it a circle. It's all.
We can lend you ours, Dan. You could use ours. All right, thank you.